Hi all, I'm Degan, the creator and producer of the LIBI podcast. This 100% volunteer-run show was born out of the Rainforest Alberta movement and features incredible people who are leaders, innovators, and have big ideas. In this episode, I have an inspiring conversation with Geoffrey Pradella, an advocate for kids' brain health and someone who was lucky enough to have a real-life Yoda. Let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to the Leaders, Innovators and Big Ideas podcast. Today, my guest is Geoffrey Pradella. Jeff, thanks for joining me today.
Very pleased to be here. Thanks, Al.
Excellent. So we can give the listeners a primer. You're the Chief Executive Officer of the Kids Brain Health Network and the incoming chair of the Genome Alberta board. How about you talk a little bit about yourself, other than the titles, like what your career trajectory has been like? How did you get here today?
Yeah, that's great, the backstory. I started in foreign affairs, so did a degree in international relations with a minor in economics, and then worked for the government of Alberta and the government of Canada doing trade negotiations. At that point, kind of did a bit of a sidestep because I wanted to have a bit of private sector experience, really to understand business and how it thinks and how trade and foreign relationships impacted that. So I had a great 5-year run actually here with an oil company in Calgary. And at that point, decided to go to law school because the people above me in the hierarchy of foreign affairs, they all had law degrees. So I went to law school intending to do international relations or international law. Was halfway through that degree when the mentor that had been paired up with me because of my career trajectory started this conversation about encouraging me to think about going into medicine, which at the time was completely out of left field. As a very successful international lawyer, and he was a previous president of the International Court of Justice, paid attention. He was very kind. He said, look, if you want to continue on this path, you'll do great, but then gave me this pretty compelling argument based on his observations as to why I should think about medicine. We talked about that for the rest of another year and a half and decided I was at least going to take 1 year and give his crazy idea a try, what to do next. He suggested I go to the University of Edinburgh, work with a couple of people there, and so started this journey in medicine, medical law, and then did another degree in medical ethics. So I've spent this true core of my career in this interesting triangulation of medicine, law, and ethics. And as you tend to do both in law and in medicine, specialized in areas that were of particular interest, that included being on the front benches of medical research, seeing what cool new ideas people were coming up with. And then part of that is research subjects we would also consider as vulnerable populations, vulnerable individuals. And through the work there, the tie with genomics and genetics, being in Edinburgh, this was not long after Dolly the sheep hit the front pages. So Edinburgh had become a bit of a vortex, a hotbed of genetics and genomics research. Really got interested in that, and through that wound up, it was also the very early days of the ability to do embryonic and genetic sort of screening and diagnosis. And so the whole issue in medicine, law, and ethics of embryo selection, huge area of great controversy and a lot of need for a lot of hard work. Through working in that area, came to understand and had a lot of engagements with various advocates from the disability communities. And so disabilities became a big focus of my professional work in this 3 sort of factor triangulation of medicine, law, and ethics. Then returned to Canada, joined a board that provided services to adults with developmental disabilities. As I timed out on that board, very good friend and colleague was timing out on the board of Kids Brain Health Network, said, "Oh, would you consider joining?" I did. Love the organization, love what it does. 6 years on the board, 3 as the board chair. And then with a significant pivot in the focus of our mission and a different federal government funder now than we had for the first 15 years, stepped in as interim CEO and then was asked to drop the word interim. So here I am, getting up every day to make life better for kids with some pretty profound challenges right from the start of life.
What an amazing story. That's unbelievable. You didn't want to take the easy road in life, did you?
Well, that was actually one of Sir Robert Jennings' observations, that the tougher and more intractable a dilemma, the more I seem to get passionate about it. And yeah, he was not wrong.
Wow, that's amazing. So I'm just curious, what other observations did he have that kind of pointed him in that direction, which you're saying is right out of left field. So it's not like you were thinking about going into medicine or anything like that.
Yeah, none of where I wound up was part of a plan. It was the courage of taking some leaps of faith on the advice of some tremendous people who I trusted a great deal. Yeah, so he had 3 sort of primary observations. He said, first and foremost, we talk about the courses you're doing in law, and when we talk about family law, criminal law, and tort, which personal injury in particular, I just have this strong sense that you're one of the people in the world who truly cares at a very deep level about complete strangers and the hardships they're experiencing in life. So I care about people. The second was that the more challenging, as we were just talking about, the more challenging, if not intractable, the dilemma, the more obsessed I get in figuring it out. And then his third observation was that I struck him as someone who would be far more engaged and find my career far more rewarding if I was in a field trying to figure out what the law should be, as opposed to just applying the law as it's already written, which is really what lawyers do.
Yeah.
So drew this parallel for him coming out of the Second World War and then going to law school and going into international law. And he said, for my generation, figuring out what mechanisms we needed to put in place to try and prevent the sort of calamities of the previous 50 years was a huge area of discovery. It was a huge area of figuring out what the law needed to be. So things like the law of the sea that were created at that time, a lot of the international conventions, the standing up of the UN was going on at that time. So for him, he said, I see a lot of myself in you, because it was really cool to be somewhere where we were figuring out what the new rules needed to be, because the old ones weren't working. For me, at that moment in time, he said, there's this thing called the Human Genome Project, and it's not quite completed yet, but what I've read about it, what I understand, it's going to change everything in our understanding. It's going to change our sense of our own humanity. It's going to challenge and drive change to many of the fundamental legal and ethical constructs around medicine and healthcare. So he said there's going to be no shortage of figuring out what the law needs to be because of this vastly world-changing technology and ability in science called the Human Genome Project. So that was his pitch.
Wow. I'm convinced.
Yeah. And I think he pulled some strings and let me do an extra half course as part of my degree in medical law. So I did. I loved it. It was fascinating, just even at the very fundamentals and basics, and wound up actually doing my honors degree thesis in a field of medical ethics and law. So he was right. This was a decision to go to law school in my 30s. So I often think back to this incredible, almost Yoda-like gentleman of such wisdom. And in a year and a half, he had figured some things out or observed things about me that after 35 years of living in this head, I didn't see in myself. And I've been going on this path, never looked back, no regrets. So one of those amazing moments in a life story that truly changes your life.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating and super inspiring. Like being able to have that kind of a mentor who took the time to really know you and give you direction. And then the fact that you listen to it, that's a pat on the back for sure, because it's obviously working out for you.
Yeah. My piece was being willing to take some chances and do something different. And as I say, he was an individual of enormous accomplishment, and had, on that basis, who was I not to at least seriously consider his advice? And then he sent me off to work with two extraordinary individuals at the University of Edinburgh who were equally and profoundly caring about students, right? So from the three examples of those three individuals who I was so fortunate to have just land in my pathway, that really taught me a value about paying it forward. And so after finishing degrees and satisfying my parents that yes, after doing yet another degree, I was going to go and get a job again, worked as a lecturer and researcher at the university and paid it forward. I spend time, and to this day, I think at the Inventors Conference, signed up to be a mentor, because that made such a huge difference to my life and my career that I like to be able to do that for others who are coming up behind me.
Well, good on you. That's outstanding. I want to highlight a couple things. Like you had said that you didn't have your life planned out, and you almost went where the wind blows, but you had like a bit of guidance from someone who, Yoda, who could send you in that direction, but being open to that challenge is one of the powerful points that I'm taking from this, is the fact that you just decided to trust that person and go with it. And then we met at Inventors recently, and there was another fella, and I can't remember the name. I'll try and look it up, but he had said that the magic happens on the other side of fear.
Yes.
And that kind of ties really into that, because if someone told you to do something crazy like that and you're just like, no, that's too uncomfortable, you wouldn't be where you are today. It's all about taking those challenges. Greg Hart from Inception, you used to say all the time, be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's the way to live life, to be accomplished and successful for sure.
Yep. I agree 100%. Yeah.
Now, another thing about Inventors is when we met, we had a really interesting discussion about something that you're working on. It's like a bold new entity, is it? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, happy to do that. So just as a bit of kind of context, so the Kids Brain Health Network has been around, it's in its 16th year, a not-for-profit, one of the networks of centers of excellence funded by the Government of Canada. And for 15 of those years, received federal funding, ran competitions, and issued grants for research in our space of neurodevelopmental challenge. Over the course of that 15 years, funded things from original discovery research through to applied, and then the development of, okay, well, what would you do with this new understanding based on the science? So the development of programs and services, and in some cases, some pretty cool technology through that research intensive process. Then we've shifted now and are funded under the Strategic Science Fund, and that is more about scale and spread, getting these tremendous new innovations into the hands of every child and family who could benefit. So that's KBHN. 8 years ago, we stood up the Kids Brain Health Foundation as a charity, so a registered charity in Canada that's now qualified actually to receive philanthropic money from the United States and issue IRS tax receipts. So the foundation now is in a position where it helps to amplify the work that the network's doing. But in the conversations around our mission, which is ambitious and idealistic, let's shoot for the stars, getting supports into the hands of every child and family in Canada who could benefit. So based on the prevalence of neurodevelopmental challenges, that's 1 in 10 kids. That's 500,000 Canadian children. And the stark realization that there really wouldn't be sufficient government funding plus philanthropic funding to achieve the mission. And in fact, huge leaps in scale and spread could be realized if we were able to figure out the right mechanism to attract a private equity, private capital to the acceleration and spread of these incredible inventions. So a lot of work over the course of a year. The board had been talking about what's next, because in that innovation pathway, we were taking everyone up to that point of implementation in the real world. So how are we going to get things out of the lab, get things into the hands of the kids and families? So with a lot of kind of thought, some years of conversation at the board table, and then a lot of talking to some very smart people who have experience and success in commercialization, scale, and spread, landed on the establishment of the Kids Brain Health Innovation Fund. And so this third entity, and now just to shorthand how we talk about KBH Plus instead of listing all the names.
Okay.
So the Innovation Fund is set up to facilitate investments for the scale and spread, acceleration, and in many cases, commercialization of these inventions. That brings a third stream of funding, essentially, to the table in order to accomplish the mission, and one where we are very optimistic about our ability to attract investors. And because of all the projects that we funded and have a great deal of familiarity with, we have some in-house deal flow. We have some early investment prospects. So that's where we're headed next. It will be the first of its kind in Canada. Generally, the first definitely in our field of pediatric neurodiversity. And so we're pretty excited about all the heavy lifting and steep climbing that it's going to take to make this a success. But to your earlier comment, I'm now standing firmly on this side of that fear, which also drives some passion and determination to figure out how to make it work.
Well, you don't look like someone who gives up easy.
No.
So that brings up a couple questions, and hopefully I can get through them both without forgetting one after I start talking about the other. But how does this different from universities that do research and then commercialize the technology out of universities? And then when a technology is discovered or needs to be scaled and optimized, do you do a bunch of different technologies in a single company, or is there like a bigger companies out there that take those on as new projects, or do you spin off a new company for each one of the projects that comes out? And maybe talk a little bit about how that all works, because obviously I have no idea.
Yeah, so in many ways, it's very similar to the tech transfer and pre-seed and seed investments that universities do with their researchers and commercializable technologies that their researchers have discovered and invented. So there's some parallels there. What they tend to, they're broad in scope. So across a university, you'll have any number of very cool inventions and technologies that have this sort of potential, that then work with their tech transfer offices, negotiate intellectual property, and then typically then hand them into another entity. At the University of Calgary, just to use an example, tech transfer office paired with USeed, which is the U of C's pre-seed and seed capital. So more of an investment arm than a tech transfer arm. These are all pieces of that pathway. So universities are doing that. We're working with those researchers and their tech transfer offices as a funder, an external funder. So we support that process through to the point of being commercialization ready. And then I've been having lots of conversations with sort of the investment offices that some universities have for commercialization purposes. And those conversations have revolved around potential for sharing of deal flow, for coming up with each of us having different potential investment opportunities, and then going in likely as co-investors. So part of the magic is that we're a new and very focused fund coming to the table to work with any university, researcher, and tech transfer and funding agency that has really cool stuff in our space that will help our kids. So KBHA, it continues kind of a core aspect of our business model, which is with a tiny but mighty team of 8 people, which is actually a couple of people bigger than we were at the outset, but we're 8 people and we're national. And so we have been able to accomplish what we have over 16 years through collaborations and partnerships, not trying to do anything on our own. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And it sounds like it's very intricate working with all those different groups, and they all have different needs, wants, and desires. And you're trying to fit it all together like some kind of weird jigsaw puzzle.
Exactly. And I'm hoping there's something that I learned in international relations and trade negotiations that might actually help with that process.
There you go. Full circle.
Full circle. Pulling a whole lifetime together.
That is brilliant. I really appreciate you joining me today and telling me your story and what you're trying to accomplish. I hope you touched some of the listeners and make them want to learn more. We'll put your LinkedIn into the show notes so that people can reach out to you if they have some questions or want to get involved. And from my perspective, really cool. I think kids' brain health is a beautiful thing to be working in and on. And I have a warm place in my heart for kids and helping them. So that's very cool. Before I end the show, is there anything else you wanted to bring up or talk about before we go?
Yeah, no, just a couple of points. Okay. A lot of the people in our world, and I think a lot of our investors will be people that we talk about as having lived experience. So with 1 in 10 kids, it's 1 in 5 families, which means every 4th or 5th person I meet has a story to tell me about one of their kids, one of their siblings, a niece or a nephew or a cousin who has a neurodevelopmental challenge. There's a great deal of resonance. And I started on this journey many years ago, over 20 years ago, with the decision to go into medicine. Then I wind up in this area of specialization. And then several years ago, my brother has a son who is significantly autistic. So in a sense now, I kind of get up and go to work every day for Liam and all the Liams who are out there. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's the coming together of a lot of years of training, a great deal of passion, and now a real personal drive to make a difference for our kids.
I love it. I love it. Thanks again for being here. I really appreciate your time, and we'll keep in touch and see if we can send people your way.
Wonderful. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for the opportunity, and I'm thrilled to continue the conversation.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Everybody else, thanks for joining us on the Leaders, Innovators and Big Ideas podcast. We'll talk to you soon. Cheers. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. Have you ever thought of being a host? Email adeldegan@gmail.com and I will get you started on your journey. Now you can have just as much fun as I do meeting inspiring people and learning new things.
This episode is brought to you by New Idea Machine, a unique blend of a tech incubator and a software development powerhouse. We're not just building software, we're crafting the next generation of homegrown tech wizards. Got a project in mind or looking to hire fresh talent? Reach out and let's make tech magic happen. Visit newideamachine.com for more info.
Music for the show was created by Tony Del Degan.